Paul, you're sort of speaking tongue in cheek about the amount of edits and the crayons that you all used in going through another round of track changes, but I do appreciate the attention that everybody's paying to it. And, obviously it matters a lot to you, and it matters a lot in general. So your attention to it is appreciated. And I think I'm hopeful that over the course of the next hour, we can bring resolution to a few pieces. I know the OSU team has been doing some internal dialogue with council and leadership at the university and folks within the college. Tom's just joining us now, and we'll have a little bit of direction, I think, from them integrating you all's feedback with what they've heard at the university in terms of the board not the composition, but the roles and responsibilities of the board ED, and actually spelling out a little bit of a research director role. So I'd like to actually start there. And then hopefully by the time we get around to it, Bob will have joined and we can talk about some of the mission stuff. And then there's a lot of other elements in the document that I'm hoping we can bring resolution to pretty quickly in terms of agreement or not on track changes suggestions. So with that said, anybody have a problem just jumping right in? All right, Katie or Paul, I assume one or the other of you, if you'd be willing. There's Bob, to talk a little bit about those roles and responsibilities sections that you all have been working on. Katie?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Good to see everyone. I think coming out of the discussion on Tuesday, we started taking kind of that concept of, the executive director would be somebody on leave from the university that would work for the entity for the forest, and just started to try to materialize what that would look like in an HR sense of things. And there did seem to be a challenge if the person who served as the executive director was not an OSU employee, but was managing OSU employees. That created, I would say, a human resources issue. And so what we have worked on, and Peter, if you want, I need to pull up the document, but I can, if you want me to share my screen, I can do that. But what we've tried to do is create a framework where the executive director would work for the board, be an employee of the entity, and would have a relationship with the university in ensuring that the university is carrying out the research and management objectives of the mission of the forest. So would be really in a liaison position with the university. And I'll work right now. Paul, I don't know, Paul or Tom, if you want to fill in anything, and I'll find the document. I actually don't have it pulled up right now. I need to pull it up so I can share it.
Yeah. No, and with that, maintaining that kind of on leave status from OSU, right? That we want that individual that's has a research background, and Keith, I think, said it well, that being part of OSU and kind of having that returning rights to OSU is going to bring a different individual than the other just job description would as well. So yeah, again, it's the individual working solely for the board when they're chopped over, and then with oversight of OSU and perhaps kind of a contract manager role, somewhat with OSU on the management side.
So what we've done is we've taken the document, kind of the latest version that I think Melissa had updated last night, and then updated those sections. So the executive director would be hired and employed and reporting to the board of directors. We retain some of that concept that the dean of the College of Forestry would lead the selection process in coordination with the board of directors, and then nominate individuals to the board of directors. So trying to have that open process. The executive director would be an OSU employee on leave to the forest. I think that also shows that this is a person who has research expertise and works and coordinates with OSU to ensure the management, operations, and research on the forest are met. I think the next kind of big change, it would be in the red pieces that, and this isn't much, it's just, I think this section is just more of a rewording, but manages kind of those relationships with the executive branch, so different agencies, the legislature, stakeholders, communities, and then also works with any subcommittees or advisory committees of the board. So, you know, I think the big piece is we see this as somebody who's managing the entity, managing the board's strategic thinking, ensuring that the financial obligations are being met, and that through their relationship with OSU is carrying out those items. And Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, you've got a research manager. Why do you need, what I see is you need a manager, someone that can manage all aspects. And I'm not sure why you're putting the emphasis on another research person for that position. I don't.
Maybe I'll defer that question to Tom.
Yeah. So, well, that's a good question, Paul. You're asking it from a perspective, basically the way it's described here, that this person's doing this fiscal management, they're doing the management of the board and the, engaging between the board and the research activities and management activities, which are directly connected, but between those activities on the forest, why does this person need to be a scientist or a researcher? And it depends. If you had two positions and you had somebody that was basically the board authority, the person that works for the board and manages the entity itself and wasn't responsible for directing research, then you could imagine that person not needing to be a scientist. But if this person is directing the research activities on the forest, they need to be more than just a manager. They have to be a manager and a researcher. They have to understand the underpinnings of research activities. They have to be able to critique proposed research activities that would go forward on the forest. They have to be able to work with the team to troubleshoot problems and engage with not just the university, and the college, but to engage with researchers that are interested in working at the Elliott from around the world. So we see that the person that is in charge of the research forest needing to be a scientist. We see the person in charge of the entity perhaps not having to have those, but not if not having two separate positions, then we see it as one, that person has to be a scientist.
And I thought there were two positions. I thought there was a research manager and an ED.
Yeah, so the university would have, this wouldn't be filled out in, any legislation, but the university would have a research director that would be kind of overseeing our research portfolio and the transcending management.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. It doesn't necessarily need to be. I guess our thought is to have that background, to be, have an individual working for the board that is overseeing OSU and has that expertise, might help in the management. But you certainly can make the argument there's other pieces of expertise that would lend to that position as well.
I guess my biggest concern is the financial viability of this project.
Mhm.
And I don't know that a researcher would be the best person to ensure those goals are met. Anyway, we beat that one to death, but
Well, so if you roll up, Katie, I'm to the, no, I guess I meant the other direction for the executive director.
Yeah, that's in this piece right here.
So then where is the other position described?
I actually did not put the research director in this because this was more of the outline to go, and I didn't think it was appropriate to go in legislation. I can, but on the research director piece, that would be really the person carrying out and ensuring that the research projects fit the mission, that the management of the forest ties in. I think, and I can see Mark has his hand up. It might be helpful, like really quickly, maybe we touch on just the other piece with the board of directors that, because I think then you just see how it all kind of plays together, maybe that the board of directors has the oversight of the operations and the fiscal integrity of the forest in meeting its mission directives. And then we would just suggest that the board of directors contracts with OSU for the implementation of the forest management operations. I think that's really the only change, other change in this document. And with that, if there's any other questions or discussion around this concept.
So let's go to Mark.
Yeah, I guess I was just going back to the skill set with this person that will be the director. And it's going to obviously need to be somebody who's pretty multifaceted and I think have some familiarity and background in research, but also have some really strong management skills. And in some ways, I don't know that that changes the structure, which is what we're really talking about here. I didn't actually see anything in the writing, or if I did, I missed it, that it said this person was going to be a research person. I think that's all just
It's in that second bullet, the first clause there, Mark, that OSU added and you haven't seen yet, but due to the need for research connection, ED will become. So it's pointing most specifically to the research as opposed to other skills that might be needed and important.
I think fair enough, but in a job position description, I mean, if you're sort of equating this to an associate dean, an associate dean obviously brings both a background, but a strong skill set in administration and other things. It's not. So I guess to me, it will be in the position description.
Which would be written by the board.
Yeah, and I think, again, you're going to be looking for a pretty special person to be able to manage this. So, maybe they have a law degree, maybe they have a research background. I think we'll just have to see what comes out of it.
So are you okay with the language the way it is, Mark?
Yeah, because I don't think all it says is we'll become an OSU employee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading it sort of the way Mark is. The language is fine. It just says there needs to be connectivity to the research. In the way the language is, due to need for research connection, the ED will become an OSU employee on leave to the Elliott. And I think that wording is open-ended. I think it's fine. The board then can determine how much research background they're going to value and prioritize. So I don't have a problem with that statement.
If it is hired as the equivalent of an associate dean, I mean, it just, I mean, we can work this out. These are details that could come later, but you know, generally you hire somebody that has both scholarly academic credentials as well as Paul had said, or I can't remember who said it, you know, maybe it was Mark, as well as administrative credentials. And that is not hard to find. The hard thing to find is somebody that has that, both those items, plus has forest management knowledge and experience. And so we're asking for a lot. There are a few people that have that collection of skills in one person, but it's not that common. I do, you know, in talking with our provost today, he was just emphasizing how much time the person with the responsibility to the board, how much time they will spend with the board, that is not an insignificant part of that job, and used our board of directors, I mean, excuse me, our board of trustees as an example, and the amount of time spent educating and working with and liaising between the board and the university is remarkable. And we have, you know, somebody that filled that role as a board secretary here, and with somebody working with that person, and that, you know, again, one could imagine two models, one where it's one person that's both the ED that serves that administrative and board, you know, function role, you know, working directly with the board and for the board, and then somebody that that has that that is really running the research operation on the forest. And it's for me, it's hard to, yeah, without laying out that is those two items exist, you know, laying that out, that there's an ED and a you know, a board authority and a forest authority, a research forest authority. It's hard to see the, you know, where that split exists and how it exists, because we don't write it in here. We just make the assumption that there'll be a second position. So that's a really important position.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I saw Bob's note there in the chat. It's very, very true. You know, our thought I look at this is this individual is going to be very busy, and it's going to be mostly focused up and out, right? Focused on the board and focused on the exterior, you know, the external pieces, and then working with OSU, which is then looking down into the details of working the forest as well.
Yeah, so that does mean that person doesn't need to be, I would agree, that person needs the public skill set and the administrative skill set, and far less so the science skill set. But then we need to spell out who that other individual is and where they fit in the, because I don't want to just leave it to our imagination or to, you know, I just feel like that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, and the other individual you're speaking to is the research director. And I think what I heard Katie say, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think what I heard Katie say is that spelling that out is important, but it may not belong in the legislation itself. And I am more and more contemplating the fact that we're going to need a set of bylaws and sort of organizational structure and companion documents that work alongside this. And to a certain extent, especially with this piece right now, and I'm not saying this just to you, Tom, but I think for all of us, by way of contexting the conversation, I think important to realize this is a legislative concept. It's going to go to legislative council. They're going to come back with some real language for us to look at and for all of you to weigh in on. and we need to figure out sort of what the right balance is. I'm going to ask one question of Paul, and then I'm going to ask everybody if you can live with the language as it's stated here, or if you require amendments on the ED role specifically. And then I'm going to ask about the board of directors. Paul, in the previous conversation we had, I don't know, earlier this week, there was discussion, I think maybe Salinger, you brought it up, or Mark, or I can't remember who it was, but somebody brought it up around public process related to the hiring of the executive director and whether the public would have any visibility into that. And I wondered if, OSU had done any contemplating as you did your revisions, or if others want to weigh in on that. I noticed that it didn't come up in the set of edits that folks proposed.
Yeah, we didn't put that in there. I think we answered that last time. But we can add it there if desired. Our thought on that is that really the process for the hiring will be set by the board of directors, and decisions about the public input, will be the board of directors to make sure that happens or that it's included. So we can, if we do contemplate a public process. That's what we currently do here at OSU, internal to us, for hires as well. And we'd be, in my mind, and again, I wouldn't codify this in legislation, but in my mind, the last 2 or 3 candidates, as the board looks at them, they'd be put out for public consumption to get input from the public as well.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, now to my other question. Can folks live with the language that's in front of you describing the role of the executive director? If you've got concerns, please raise them verbally now. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you're good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's take a look at the board
I'm
role.
reading still.
You're supposed to read before the meeting.
Yeah, I was working on your other project before the meeting.
And there's a whole new set of things here that we just talked through. So I'm tongue in cheek there, Bob.
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Appreciate it. Katie, since you've got yours up, I'm happy to take back over, but since you've got edits in this version related to OSU on the board piece, I'm wondering if you can scroll down.
Yep, here's the board of director piece. And the only edit that we made was in that first bullet.
Katie, can you just talk through, we'll contract with OSU for implementation of forest management? How is that different, or contract with OSU for research work, or what?
Yeah, so and maybe it should be like research and management, operations, but the thought here was earlier what we were talking about was whoever the executive director, if he was an OSU, she was an OSU employee or not, would oversee the management operations and therefore oversee OSU employees who may be carrying out different operations. And, as we were fleshing that out, as I said, on the HR issue, it seemed like they needed to be separate. And so that's why this contract language would be that the board would then contract with OSU to implement the forest management operations that would be consistent with the research, plan and mission. So have that be, anything from the recreation plan to harvest operations to putting in culverts, or, and then the research platform as well. So I think that kind of encapsulates what we were thinking about there, Mark.
Just in terms of the flow of money, basically, all the harvest revenue goes to the entity, and then the entity, the only money that OSU gets out of the harvest and for everything they're gonna do comes from the harvest revenue that comes through this entity.
Yeah, and so I think that would be in the terms of contract, OSU, like if we're looking at harvest specific, it's not like we have a team of loggers, so we would be, OSU very likely would be in the terms of the contract, the one that is setting up the harvest, plan, and then contracting with the logging crew to come out, and then ensuring that payment's happening to the entity. So putting that responsibility onto OSU, so then it's very consistent with the research plan and the research objectives in those management operations.
It seems that in my thinking that it would be like any other forest management organization. The owners would subcontract with whoever. In this case, it's OSU for management of the forest, and those employees would be responsible to the board through the ED to do those activities that they directed. So it makes sense that they're all college employees. I think it makes good sense.
Yeah, I think there's some advantage there. And what we talked about was last time that, OSU will prepare and execute the budget. The board approves it, and the executive director is kind of that in between that's managing it, right? So OSU is executing those plans on behalf of the board and the executive director. And to Paul's point, I think there's part of that advantage that, again, the revenues that come in and revenues that go out, whether it's held by OSU or it transfers to the executive director that then passes it back down. I think that's just some fiscal accounting we'll have to work out in the operations. But the point is that executive director has oversight of that process and controls the funds upon the forest. And to Paul's point, I think some of the advantages there is that, we have within the College of Forestry and within OSU, we have a existing contracts group that, develops those contracts and executes those in accordance with state law, rather than the executive director or the board having to create that again within the forest.
Other questions, comments related to the role of the board of directors? Okay, I'm going to call the question here. Are folks in agreement accepting the role as it's described here? And there are only the changes up top from OSU that you don't have. So nobody has the version that Katie's sharing right now. This is Melissa's, the version that Melissa sent last night, which included her edits, Bob Salinger's marks, and Paul Beck's, now with additions from OSU.
It looks like we're back to a biennial reporting as opposed to annual. Is that correct?
No, I think
Yes. Bob Salinger suggested that it's the middle of an annual programmatic review. Midway down there. Yep.
yeah.
Bob, do you want to speak to why you wanted it annual instead of biannual?
I just think it makes sense to report out on an annual basis. I think especially in these early years where we're making a big transition. I think I'm not sure why we would go every other year. It's a big gap between reporting out and getting that connection back. The other question in here that I had was we're back, it looks like we're back to approval of the FMP and amendments by this board rather than the land. Does the land board still have final approval on that, or is it a dual?
Let me take them one at a time here,
Okay.
Bob. So let's go with the annual piece. Paul, I want to check with you. You raised the question, why annual versus biennial, and did Bob's explanation satisfy you?
Yes and no. I just, these are big reports. And I worry about getting caught up and doing nothing but reporting. So it's a concern. Maybe in the beginning it would be annually, and we could tone that down going forward. But yeah, that's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, well, it maybe, I mean, we talked about, 2-year operational plans. And of course, then it makes sense to have the 2-year operational plan be followed up with the biennial programmatic review. Because, programmatic review, as Paul is saying, is a significant undertaking. You're talking about covering all the bases, and which it is, that's a big report, and it can be done. It's just a lot of bureaucracy, and it may be that we could accomplish with an annual updating on an annual updating to the board with maybe a less, with specific operational updates or specific, we could be a little bit more specific about what that looks like, and then have the programmatic review be biennial.
Bob, would that satisfy you, where you'd have a biennial programmatic review sort of following with the biennial operations plan with an annual, I don't know, update and report to the board on research and forest activities or something to that effect?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe we should write it in just so that it's clear that there is annual report and
Katie, we're all looking at your screen. I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you to be the scribe here.
Let's see. You want to go back up? Sorry about that.
No, we're going to go reject or I can do this afterwards, but submittal of an annual should go back to biennial, but we need to add a bullet or something that would say
there'll be annual reporting
along with annual reporting.
Yeah, performance.
What about this? What about the performance review?
I think the same.
Okay.
But we need to add in a bullet related to annual updates. And I can work on that.
Well, wouldn't the,
Go ahead.
I thought we just said with biannual programmatic review and sort of annual operations performance report. I thought that's what we just.
Oh, that's good. Yep, it's there. I'm sorry, I missed it. Yep. So
that's just the annual. That's just the annual.
That's good. Sorry, I was complicating it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So does that make sense under that? I'm reading that bullet. The bullet just above it says the programmatic review must be submitted and presented to the state prior to the board of director approval adoption of an annual report. It doesn't really make sense. I feel like the annual, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I don't know.
No, you're not. Because it was structured.
Yeah.
For a reason. I think
I think the main thing was that it was that I thought the intent of that was that the programmatic review had to be submitted and approved before the next biennial operations plan. Because the idea would be they would be looking at the operations. They would have to have gone through the review and said, okay, things are in good shape. Proceed on the operations plan for, it's gonna be overcomplicated.
Well, I think the way this would get corrected would be going back up to the top bullet here, the submittal of a biannual programmatic review and an annual operations performance report. And then down below,
Describe the biennial or the programmatic review.
we must be, yeah, the programmatic review must be submitted.
Okay.
And would it work to then below just take out the time from that indentation, the annual operating performance report, just call it the operations performance report? Less is more.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Having made those adjustments, are there lingering questions, comments, or concerns?
Sorry, Pierre, I'm thinking it does make sense. The programmatic review,
Right.
which is going to be every,
Yeah, I think you could just strike that operations performance report below, right? We just want the programmatic review done and approved before the ops plan is done, right?
Just delete the subordinate, first subordinate bullet under the third. Let's see. Oh my God.
Right there where the cursor is.
The one above that. Yeah, that one.
This one right here,
Yeah,
Delete it.
right there.
it's gone.
Gone. Didn't do track changes though.
It did.
It is.
Okay.
You might be covered up by your squares.
Yeah, okay.
Any other outstanding? I'm going to try to keep us clipping here.
I think what we're trying to get at though is under this, does the land board actually see?
So
Yeah,
that's the next question, Bob. That's yes. The answer is yes. It's the next section below, Katie. If you want to scroll down to the role of the land board, and I know the two toggle together, but yes, they do still have review and approval of the forest management plan.
No, the goal of this section, go back up one more time. Sorry to do this to you, but go up.
Peter, you're gonna need to put me on the payroll.
You could send me this version. That would
Oh,
help.
it's fine.
The goal we were trying to get at here was that the land board, not for approval, but would see the annual operations report and the operations plan prior to approval by basically the land board would see this package of material prior to adoption so that they could weigh in and say, hey, looks like you did a great job over the last couple of years. Looks like your next 2-year plan looks great, or why did this happen? Can you talk a little bit more about that kind of a thing? So I'm not sure we caught all of that in here.
You said land board. Did you mean to say land board or did you mean board of directors?
Okay. No, okay, all right. I'm all right with this. I'll go.
Okay. I think the question, the one you're gonna we need to focus on now is in fact the land board's roles and responsibilities, which is that next section. So this was all about the board of directors. And now we're looking
Okay,
at,
yeah, no, I was conflating the two, but so I guess the question, and I'll let it go in 1 second, but is really, is it a lot to expect sort of an annual programmatic review to a board? I know my board expects an annual programmatic review every year. That's pretty standard operating procedure. Board wants to know what you're doing every annually and how things are going. And so I'm just trying to tease out the difference between this annual ops report and this programmatic review. How do you see those as really differing at the end of the day, Tom?
Well, of course, I didn't. Well, okay, what's the difference? The programmatic review would be addressing every outcome of activities on the forest, which it spells it out there somewhere. I'm not seeing it right now, but in terms of recreational activity, educational activities, and going into detail. Whereas we have 2-year operational plans that lay out, here's what we're doing over the next 2 years. So it makes sense to me that expectation would be that this is the follow-up to the end of that 2-year operational plan. Here's our outcomes from that. And then in the performance report would detail out just the numbers in terms of the, various activities on the forest that are straightforward, easily measured, easily reported on, and that may not be accomplished. You're not saying I'm going to accomplish these things in the next 2-year period. You're 1 year into a 2-year operational plan, and so you're just giving an update as opposed to on activities, as opposed to here's all that was accomplished in the biennial plan that was laid out.
Okay, that helps, Tom. You will have to do an annual HCP report too, likely, right? Okay. All right, I'm good.
Yes.
Can Katie, will you change the second bullet here below land board?
Oh, yeah.
Receive a biennial programmatic review.
Let's see. The second, so
bullet
the
down.
proposed.
No, up above that.
Oh, I see. So that should go to biennial.
Hey, Peter, this
It's-
is Malia. I have had a really bad internet connection and got kicked off. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding where we ended up. So there is both an annual operation report as well as a biennial programmatic review that's going to the board, not the land board.
Cool. Well,
This is going to the
yes to half of that, and the other half we have not yet decided. I don't think. Does the group anticipate that they want both the biennial programmatic review and the annual operations whatever to go to the land board as well as the board of directors?
Yes.
Okay.
And I just say, Peter, I think what was approved before was really saying that that's what the board of directors was going to be submitting to the land board.
Yep. Okay, good. Let's just make sure that the language under state land board is the same or consistent with the language above. So yes to both, Malia.
It isn't going to them for approval, correct?
Receive.
Correct.
They're
Correct.
receiving it.
Yep, it doesn't
Well,
say
I mean,
approval.
it's a public document. Everybody's going to receive it.
I think it's a slightly more formal transmission to them.
Okay.
It's at a scheduled meeting, so.
I think up above, I mean, we can double check that. I think it would be that they would receive that programmatic review and then what was it called? The operations plan. Let's see. The annual operations performance report.
Yeah. Okay, my next question is, everybody good with the language on state land board roles and responsibilities as it's articulated with the edits included in front of you?
So
We have a minute to look at it.
Yep.
I can't see the whole thing. Oh, okay, I guess
Well,
I
Bill's
can't.
taking a look. Yeah, so to clarify, so this is gonna go in front of the land board 3 times every biennium. Because there'll be a biennium report and then 2 annual reports every 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would actually anticipate that probably ends up being 2 times really, because the biennial programmatic review and the annual operations performance report may well be delivered
At
at
the
one
same time.
time.
You could imagine that the year of the biennial report, that the annual performance update or report would be an appendix.
That's right.
I guess I don't have a stake in this, I guess, but I would like to leave some room for the land board to consider this.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jeff, who's on vacation this week, is the one that's really been having those conversations with the land board assistants, Dimitri in particular. And so I don't think that Malia and I have a good sense of how on board the land board is for doing an annual review and direction.
Yeah. Well, I would say let's, in terms of what this group is recommending, that's as far as I will take it. I won't presume to assume I know everything about what the land board's preferences and land board assistance guidance it's going to be. But for purposes of today, I think the question is, for those of you here today, okay, are you ready to approve this language? If you have any remaining questions or concerns, please voice them now.
Are you asking about this specific, where are you on, Peter?
Land board roles and responsibilities.
Everything that's here,
That's correct.
Well, there's still a placeholder there, Peter.
Say more.
It says placeholder, role of dispute resolution, as we discussed
good.
previously.
Good.
What do we want to do there?
Wasn't that is that different than the bullet up above?
I thought we had some language previously, because a week ago or more, when we talked about, I made the point of the land board needed to have an affirmative role, because what we had written was just that they were going to resolve problems. And I think that's because there was some language to that extent before, but maybe not.
Mark, are you asking because you want it in there? Or are you just asking to make sure we've tracked the various versions correctly?
I think it could be an appropriate place for them to weigh in if there is an unresolvable problem, if you will. But I don't want to get high centered on it either. Just some, as requested by the board of directors in OSU, the land board will fix problems.
Is it
that
provide
is it-
guidance, or is it actual decision-making authority? I think that's one question. And I'm looking back at previous versions here.
Well, I don't know, presumably they'd be sort of trying to figure out how to help 2 parties get to yes. I don't know that has to be what that looks like exactly.
I like the provide guidance phrasing.
Yeah, I think that's what we saw in an earlier version of it.
Well, yeah, and that's what's I think that's the language in this
Oh,
second
yeah, there it is.
bullet here.
Yeah.
That's right above it.
Yeah, and I don't recall language stronger than that, but I feel like there's a general sense of comfort with the land board being that sort of, worst case scenario if they need to be called on, if there is something, for them to provide guidance, I think is language that we've been using there. And I mean, at least I feel good about any feedback that I have or haven't heard from land board or assistants on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Malia. I concur.
I guess I like that language. I'm a little bit I'm questioning the paragraph above that this does not include response to emergencies or exigent circumstances.
I'm struggling with that too, Paul. I'm not sure I'm not sure I get it all.
Well, what's an emergency to me and what might be an emergency to Bob are probably two different things, or could be two different things. It's really open to interpretation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess what I was thinking there, I think I put the same comment in there. It needs to be tighter. To me, that gets at truly urgent responses that, you've got to make decisions to put out a fire, and you're going to do what you need to do. You're not going to go to your board for approval. I do think, if in fact if it requires impacting the research mission or financial integrity of operations, you're getting into foundational documents there. You're getting into major changes that we're talking about above. So, that's what I would think an emergency would be, is things that you've got to do for human health, life and safety.
Does that need to be defined in the legislation itself? Or do you really just need to give the authority to do this and then the opportunity to define it with the board at some future time?
Well, I think the challenge we get into potentially is something like salvage logging, after a fire, where the board says, we got to go and log a whole bunch of areas because we have this problem. If in fact that's consistent with all the foundational documents, then fine, you can go do that for sure. But if you're actually changing foundational documents, you're going and salvage logging in a Marble Merlet reserve, then you're changing foundational documents, and you're into, those kinds of edits that do require.
But we're not going to change foundational documents.
Now without approval of the land board.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the providing issue specific mission related policy guidance kind of covers that, and I think the forest management plan would include things like emergency, whether or not you're going to fight fires or you're going to let them burn. I would hope that would be included in the FMP. Be a pretty big one.
Bob, can you live with it if we delete that purple section there? The tightening up would be in fact deleting it.
Yeah.
Hang on there. So as stated, then if you eliminate, then the board, or excuse me, the land board needs approve proposed responses to catastrophic or unanticipated events. And so you're saying, Paul, in the FMP, it will detail forest fire fighting operation, and that's where I'm concerned here. That does the land board micromanage that type of response, which is not what we want.
No.
And so that's my concern with taking out this does not include. I don't like the wording. I think it's it's vague, but Bob, my concern that salvage logging, we'll talk about another point, but how do we not have to lean on the land board to fight a fire?
Pre-approval in the forest management plan.
Well, what's interesting too about that bullet, reading the first sentence there, it's not highlighted, is that comment is not subordinate to the forest management plan, right? So this is saying anytime that we're going to respond to a catastrophic event that impacts research, financial integrity, it's going to the state land board. It's not necessarily whether it's under the FMP or not.
It's not possible.
Yeah, I think probably the whole bullet could come out. Mark, do you agree there? Thoughts, Mark? You out there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's open to a lot of interpretation, and it's maybe
Yeah, I think we get where we need to go.
confuses things more than it answers things.
Yeah, I think between the LA Forest Management Plan, subsequent revisions and amendments, proposed revisions to the Habitat Conservation Plan, and provided issue-specific mission-related policy guidance probably gets us coverage on what we need here. So I'm okay with that. You can
Great.
pull the whole bullet.
Thanks.
But one thing up above on the that we somehow did get lost is on the received biennial programmatic review and the annual operations performance report. The other thing that we want to see go before the land board, not for approval, but in some ways more important than those, is the proposed operational biennial operations plan. So that was sort of the package, was the idea that, you know, they would run the biennial up plan in front of the land board and just say, you know, thoughts. The land board doesn't approve, doesn't amend, but sees that. Is that an issue for folks?
And this is what we're doing in the next year, right? That's
Yeah, the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Is that correct? The biennial operations plan?
Yep, that is correct. Folks okay with that?
Mark, did you get your question about dispute resolution answered
Yeah,
sufficiently? Can we delete the bottom placeholder?
yeah, I'm okay with that if others are.
Okay,
We're good.
everybody good? Anybody not good?
This is better.
It is better. It's 4 o'clock. That was 4 bells that just rang. I would love to take 2 minutes or so of people's time. I want to just get a temperature check. One, Katie, I want to just say out loud, if you would please send me this version when you're done, that would be most appreciated. I'd like to create a cleaned up version for people to look at and share back with you. Before I do that though, it would be really helpful to me to get a sense of just temperature on mission. Bob took a pretty thorough effort at trying to consolidate and condense.
And failed.
What it generated was a series of questions and edits and suggestions from other people. What I had said at the conclusion of the last meeting was, Bob, you may absolutely try to simplify this, but if it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to try to reconcile people's perspectives on your consolidation, my preference would be to go back to the 11, which are drawn from some of the original documents that the advisory committee developed. So do folks want to go another round on revising the mission statement, or are you okay leaving it with the somewhat clunky but fairly expansive group of 11?
So Peter, are you talking specifically about the mission statement, that single bullet, or about the 11 items beneath, or the 9 or
The
10?
11 items beneath, and then the full mission statement, the single bullet does need attention. I'm aware of that. That needs to be reconciled together.
Well, I kind of thought, Bob offered something, and at least if I'm remembering right, Paul and Melissa had a couple comments on a couple points, but were relatively minor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The only problem with that is, and my points were minor, but those 11 were agreed on by the entire group. And in accepting those 11, we're going to have to go back and debate all of that again to a certain extent. That's the only concern I've got.
That was
My,
part of
my
what I
two
was-
cents is if this group went to the advisory committee and said, we made it better, what do you think? They'd roll with it.
probably.
Peter,
Yeah,
this is Malia. And I'm sorry, I'm not turning my video on, but I'm having a really bad internet time, and so I don't want to get kicked out. I think I'd like to propose something, maybe a slightly different path, and see what the 5 advisory committee members think. Is that I think there is some benefit and some value of the 11 bullet points being something that's been agreed upon by the larger group. I do think that if this group were to go to the advisory committee on Wednesday and propose an agreed upon change, I think there's a path forward there. But the other benefit that those original 11 carry is that they've been a part of some of these foundational documents from the beginning. And from my perspective, what I'm sitting here for, and as I'm listening to all of you speak and what your priorities are, what your non-negotiables are, et cetera, are, as we sit down with a drafter and actually start producing an LC, wanting to make sure that when the drafter has questions or ambiguity around any of the documents that we bring to them, this list of sideboards, that we really know what the core is that you were trying to get at. And so my proposal would be, what I would love to do is sort of start with the original 11 as the highest level. This is what we're trying to get out of a legislative concept, but then use the new version as well as the comments, et cetera, as information, as helpful information for that drafter to sort of show what direction this group is going in, what it is they're trying to get to, et cetera. But I'm not sure that there's any harm in starting with the 11 and having a progression forward from there, rather than needing to kind of frog jump over those original 11. So
Malia, you're basically, it sounds like you're inviting us to include the 11 and show, and then this shorter version, which shows simply a progression in our thought. Is that it?
Yeah. And for me, I think one of the reasons to do that is to have the original 11 as the starting point, as we go forward in the legislative process for both the public legislators, et cetera, showing that this is where we started, and it came from these original documents that have, and these concepts have been part of the central of our consensus from the beginning. So that's where we started, and then iteratively be able to show how we got from that original 11 to whatever bill we end up with in February.
I guess I have a different take in that, I think when we drafted those, we were at the start of this process, and, we weren't drafting legislation. We were drafting some guiding principles. They were kind of bounced around. It was, it wasn't a legislative drafting process. And when I looked at them, I did try to go through each one and sort of cross-reference them all. I just tried to break them out into things that actually are discrete, that the environmental stuff is in an environmental section and the economic stuff is in an economic section, because they just sort of swirled. And I think with legislation, it's a mistake to carry imprecise drafting forward, because, you see these bills all the time that just kind of perpetuate bad language and we never clean it up. The only time you have an opportunity to do that is in kind of the first crack at it. After that, you get stuck. And I think we'll be well served if there's not stuff missing and there's relatively few amendments to this, because I don't think there's anything missing. There's a few things added that we should definitely discuss, but I don't think there's anything missing. And I think it captures some of the discussion that's ensued over the last 2.5 years. And you could actually go through and find, okay, these are actually sort of discrete different things. It's not the environments in 7 of them. You know, the research will do this, this, and this, and the whatever will do this, that, and the other thing. It's kind of boom, 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 boom. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. This is the authority that it has. So
I think you make a good point in the fact that, you know, when we approached the guiding principles, that wasn't a legislative effort, and this is. I definitely agree with you that we'd like to get the language as close to right as possible on the first take, and I definitely will be doing everything I can to make sure that that happens. And I think that, I mean, ultimately, it's up to the advisory committee. I was just putting that forward as an option so that we had more information to take to the drafter as a starting point, so that they were able to
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Did we
We
lose
lost
her?
So I'm aware of people's time, and I know we've gone over, and I try not to do that. Let me try to clean up what we've got here. Paul, it'd be really helpful. This traditional and historic, you seem to want to include something in there, but that didn't, even your language didn't quite get what you wanted.
No, I would suggest that we strike both of those.
Okay.
And maybe put in existing.
isn't that the opposite of what you were saying there?
Well, the
I like
existing,
existing better, so I won't argue.
no,
with you.
existing local economies that are you know, that are logging based, are those historic and traditional, maybe not historic and traditional in the 1,000-year sense, but certainly in the 100-year sense.
Does it need to be mentioned in the yellow when, I mean, 4 is relatively clear along those lines. Promoting rural economies, including sustainable historic use and forest products goals.
Yeah,
So
maybe just stick with local economies and the Uber mission.
that's what I'd suggest.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Good. Let's do that. Thanks, folks. All right. As a reminder, and I'm going to let you go here. Let me stop sharing. We have advisory committee meeting next week, Wednesday morning. We have a conversation with all of you, 4:30 in the afternoon. My hope would be at that meeting, we can sort of finalize this based on input from the advisory committee, sort of taking anything in that we receive on Wednesday morning. My hope would be that between now and then, by Monday morning, I can get you a clean copy of this to review with an eye towards bringing things to resolution. There's a big outstanding question, I think, Bob, that you put in at the very end about, I forget what you called it, but solidifying conservation stuff in the legislation. So we're going to need to talk about that, and I may try to call some of you offline between now and then to get a sense of how you're thinking about that. In the meantime, your next review, know that it's not your last review, because you're going to get a chance to look at the actual draft legislation. but we'd like to move towards legislative council with an agreement from this group and with approval from the advisory committee by the middle of next week. So I'll get you a clean version, think about final edits, and never hesitate to reach out if we've gotten something wrong. There's a lot of moving parts here. Any final thoughts?
I have one final pressing question.
Yeah.
So Bob, the left-handed guitar player behind you on the wall, is that Jimi Hendrix?
That is Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
I'm in my son's room.
Oh, okay. Well, he's got good taste.
And I have a left-handed guitar player, but not quite so good.
Well, just don't pour lighter fluid on it and set it on fire.
On that note.
Yeah. Have a great weekend, folks.
Yeah, you all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the extra time.
Everyone.
Bye.